Hello everyone, good morning. And a very warm welcome indeed. I can see everybody's just starting to log on, so fantastic to see you all. Now, for anyone that hasn't heard from me before, I'm Rebecca Charlton, and it's been my great pleasure to host the ITV4 coverage of the Women's Tour over the last couple of editions of the race. And it's unbelievably 7 years now since the inaugural fantastic edition of the Women's Tour kicked off right back then, and we've got so much to celebrate. Now, of course, this is the time of year that we'd all be coming together to really, look forward to and anticipate another edition of the race, but it's been well documented that the race, due to COVID pandemic restrictions, has been postponed to October. That means we've got plenty to look forward to later in the year, but we thought it would be really nice to come together today and see you all, albeit virtually, and look back on those fantastic 7 years. But not only that, I think it's always really important to look forward as well, and just see where we need to go next. How do we continue this growth? How do we make it sustainable? So that's why we're all here today. A little bit of housekeeping from me. We'd love your questions and comments to come in throughout the chat, and I'll keep an eagle eye on the chat bar, as will the lovely crew behind the scenes here at SweetSpot and the Women's Tour. And we'll put those to our panellists in the last sort of 10 or 15 minutes. So without further ado, let's get our guests in here. Here's a few quick intros from me. Firstly, give a warm virtual hand to Director of Lapadelle Films and journalist Rose Manley. The CEO of SweetSpot Group, of course, the people behind the Women's Tour, Hugh Roberts. And from Breast Cancer Care, Claire Pulford, Associate Director of Community and Events. Welcome, everybody.
Hi.
Hi.
Now, I've gone for a bit of amateur set dressing today, and I, as a result, look like I'm in a garden centre, but Rose, lovely plant as well. And you, I'd like to more relevantly pick up on your backdrop, because that's fantastic.
Yeah, this is courtesy of our friend Bob Varney at Drops, actually. This is a picture of Cassia, who we're going to come on to later on, finishing in Kettering 2 or 3, 4 years back. An amazing moment, actually, because it's pretty much heralded the start of the relationship we had with Claire at Breast Cancer Care, as they were in those days, and actually a very, very memorable occasion. And the office here in Weybridge, where we're all based, has got several of these sort of murals, if I can call them that, and Drops took up some photographs that we'd obviously taken, and they turned them into this amazing wallpaper, I suppose you'd call it.
It's brilliant, and we've become very accustomed to seeing into people's living rooms now, so that is a perfect backdrop, Hugh. But for now, I know that I've given a bit of a one-liner intro on everyone, but I think it'd be really nice to just go through and hear a word from everybody about what your role is and why that has crossed over so much with the Women's Tour. So Rose, could we kick off with you?
Yeah, well, my kind of, since the Women's Tour's been going, my role has kind of changed slightly. So I'm a broadcaster, a filmmaker, I'm the presenter on the cycling podcast Feminine. I've recently launched just this year the Bunny Hop, which is a brand new women's cycling show, which is presented by Rebecca Charlton. So I've kind of had lots of different hats over the years, doing being at the race for IMG, which is what the company was that I used to work for, making documentaries with Trek Drops at the time, doing interviews for the cycling podcast Feminine, and basically just outside of actually being at the race itself, kind of doing working on in women's cycling more broadly, kind of every single day. So yeah, that's kind of my background with it.
Well, we'll talk more about that in just a short while. But Claire, let's hear from you now.
Yeah, well, I've had the pleasure of working for Breast Cancer Care, which is now Breast Cancer Now, because we more recently merged Breast Cancer Care and Breast Cancer Now to now be Breast Cancer Now. So I've been working for them for 18 and a half years. I spent about 7 or 8 years before that working in commercial sport and working across all sorts of sporting events, including the London Marathon and Formula One and things. And I've had the privilege of working for Breast Cancer Care and now Breast Cancer Now, running all of their fundraising that's associated with events, building up kind of all of their sports fundraising over the years, and a real keen interest in obviously promoting women's sport. And having the partnership with the Women's Tour and being able to encourage more women to take part in cycling has been, really very important to the charity. And we've been delighted to be the partner for the Women's Tour since 2017. And myself and my amazing team at the charity obviously really value that, and love the experience and kind of seeing more and more women taking part in cycling and raising money for the charity. So yeah, really delighted to still be involved.
Hugh, let's hear from you next.
Yeah, well, I started SweetSpot many years ago now, probably 19 years ago. And the first race that we put on was in 2004. That was the Tour of Britain. And over the years, we've been involved with bringing the Tour de France to London in 2007. And then we got going with Ride London. But it's sort of probably about 2013, I suppose, it became very apparent that we absolutely would be extremely guilty by omission if we didn't create a women's version of the Tour of Britain. And so we went ahead and did that in 2014. And I guess my role now has sort of evolved to the point where I'm sort of more like the sort of conductor of an orchestra in a way. I've got all these amazing people who are in the SweetSpot team who do their jobs and have been working now with us for, I don't know, some cases up to sort of 14 or 15 years. The collective amount of time that they've spent between all of them must be well over 200 years altogether. So they don't need me to be interfering with them every day. That's absolutely not going to happen. But what somebody needs to do is just to make sure everything's moving sort of at the same sort of speed and the same tempo. So I guess yeah, that's my job really.
Well, before we go any further and explore all these things a little bit more, I'd just like to introduce one of the key animators in the Pro Peloton by a video message now, actually. Britain's Lizzie Banks. She's got a fantastic story about how she was inspired to get into the pro ranks. So let's hear from her now.
I'm Lizzie Banks, professional road cyclist racing for Sarah Tizet WNT and the Great Britain cycling team in 2021. And I'm here to tell you why you should invest in the Women's Tour, my favourite race on the calendar. Women's sport, and in particular women's cycling, has been experiencing an explosion in popularity over recent years, and that is a momentum that is really just the start. This has been particularly clear to me since I started racing in 2015. Back then, the races were difficult to follow, but now you've got races live streamed everywhere, races live on TV, we're beginning to get the cycling coverage we deserve on the media sites, and women's cycling is all over social media. I watched this race from the side of the road in 2016, 17 and 18. I vividly remember Katie Hall dancing up Back Bank Road in Matlock, which, if you've been there, is not an easy feat. And in 2017, I watched Hannah Barnes on the podium, pull on her Adnams Best British Rider jersey and that keg of beer raised above her head. I desperately wanted to be like these riders, and every year I said, that'll be me next year. I could never have imagined that in 2018 I would end up on my first professional team with Katie Hall, and in 2019, my first outing in the race, where I ended up 7th on general classification, that on the final day I would have the honour of looking after Lizzie Dagnan's Best British Rider jersey as she wore the OVO Energy Leaders jersey. Sponsorship of the Women's Tour is about so much more than just making a quick buck. This is about creating a meaningful partnership that has the ability to inspire a nation. Inspiration, like that achieved through sport, really is immeasurable. It's not about likes on Instagram or retweets on Twitter. This is about inspiring the hundreds of thousands of fans who line the roadside year on year just to watch their heroes ride past at breakneck speed and often in the howling gales and driving rain. I am just one single example of the product of inspiration of the Women's Tour. Inspiration and reach of an event like the Women's Tour really is so vast that it's immeasurable. But we need your partnership. We want to cement the Women's Tour as the landmark event on the women's calendar. We want to provide the live TV coverage that the audience demands and create a global reach for the live action. This is an opportunity to take ownership of cycling sponsorship in the UK, to be a part of something that is growing exponentially, to be a part of a push for equality and a drive to promote healthy lifestyles. This is an opportunity for sponsorship with purpose, sponsorship to inspire, sponsorship that gives your daughters the belief that growing up to be a hero isn't something that's just reserved for their brothers. I hope to see you all out on the road of the Women's Tour in 2021.
Rose, it's so lovely, isn't it, to hear those anecdotes from Lizzie, somebody that has gone so high in the pro ranks now, being inspired by the Women's Tour. But I'd be interested to know, what were your early impressions and memories of the first time you went to the Women's Tour?
Oh my goodness, going back a few years, now you're testing my memory, Becca. I think, to be honest, I think what is remarkable about the Women's Tour is that it's always been an event that treats the riders and the spectators with a lot of respect. And I think that's certainly back, a few years ago, that was kind of actually a rare thing. I remember going to La Course once and, Lizzie Banks was trying to find a loo, which they hadn't even bothered kind of providing for the riders. So I think what has always been remarkable from the very outset about the Women's Tour is that, it always has the full kind of package. There's the streets are full of spectators. I think the school kids is, lining the streets. That really, every single edition, that always sticks in my mind, and the noise that you hear from all of those kids out, and just all of the spectators that come out and support. I think it's really been really remarkable.
It has been remarkable, and something that's interesting to pick up on there, Hugh, is just the amount of crowds that were lining the road back in 2014. I mean, you knew how much work had gone in behind the scenes to launch the race, but were you surprised in any way at just how instantly popular it was?
In some ways I was, but this doesn't sound ridiculous. What was surprising was that people were surprised, because I knew that there was a very latent interest in cycling. Obviously, having been involved with the Tour of Britain and the other big races for quite a considerable length of time, I knew that cycling per se was becoming increasingly popular by the month, and I knew that there was going to be a latent interest in the Women's Tour. And the first stage, I think it was in Oundle, wasn't it? And I can't remember exactly. My memory's a bit grey these days. But to Rose's point, within about 200 yards of the start, there was a little primary school there, and there were, probably 150 little children, boys and girls, all of them by the side of the road, going absolutely bonkers at the sight of the, in fact, the funny thing about it is they go mad at the sight of the police motorbikes going past to start with. And then when the riders come by, they're almost to the point of being hysterical, which is just amazing. And that's always lifted not just but everybody in SweetSpot's spirits, because they do put a lot of work into it. And there are times when, not everything goes absolutely swimmingly. But it's on occasions like that that you realise that life's okay, and it's just you get an enormous sense of achievement in actually managing to pull it off. And I speak for everybody in the team when I say that.
Yeah, it's been very special to see indeed. And Claire, another iconic moment that really sticks out in my mind is Kasia Niewiadoma crossing the line, solo victory, and pulling her plaque. And not only her plaque, but a pink ribbon for breast cancer care, of course. For anyone that didn't follow that stage and who she dedicated that win to, could you tell us that anecdote, because it's absolutely lovely?
Yeah, I'm going to try and do it without crying, because it's such an emotional moment for us all, I think. It was the first year of the partnership, and we'd gone out to women who had just recently gone through breast cancer, who the charity had been supporting through our services that we provide. And we'd asked them to write messages, and that we were going to be giving these ribbons to the professional cyclists to carry with them. And we'd gathered all the ribbons, they'd all been handwritten, they were handed out, obviously sort of the day before the tour began. And we knew whose ribbon matched, because we'd numbered all the ribbons, so we were aware of who was carrying whose ribbon. Anyway, we didn't know how it was going to be taken up on that first year. It was a completely new thing, but we wanted to connect the riders with the people who were affected by breast cancer, and to help bring to life, I suppose, what they were doing and the awareness that they were raising. And Kasia had a ribbon that had been written by a young woman called Laura, who'd been diagnosed. I think Laura was 24 at the time she was diagnosed. very young diagnosis, and Cassia tied it in her hair, and when she crossed the finish line, as you say, she held it out, and we were all there going, oh my goodness, like you saw it, and you saw that connection which we've been trying to really grasp. And she came off a bike, went straight onto interview, and the first thing she was talking about was that she'd been given that ribbon and that she'd read this message from Laura, and that in the hardest parts of that stage, and especially when she'd broken away from the pact and she was all by herself, she'd been thinking, we'll get emotional, she'd been thinking about what Laura had written and the inspiring message that Laura had given to her. And following that interview, I mean, I contacted Laura that night, I explained what had happened, and we put them in contact, and they started to text each other that evening and across the course of the remaining stages. And we then managed to get Laura along to, I think it was stage 4 maybe, and they met in person on the podium, and it was just so heartwarming. And I think, you know, really brought home as well, there's 2 incredibly young women side by side, you know, one out there fighting breast cancer and one out there sort of really pushing her body to the limits on you know, on the tour, both of them in very different spaces and stages in their life, but they've remained friends. And obviously, as you know, Cassia went on to win that year. Laura wasn't at the finish line, but Cassia gave me her winning trophy and asked me to get it to Laura, which we did, and they've remained in contact ever since, actually. And just, yeah, a really, really heartwarming story that brought to life kind of the importance of the partnership between us and the women's tour.
It's so important, and of course that was a pinnacle moment, a real standout moment, but there's a lot more that you've done as well with that partnership. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, it's now 4 years, and over that course of time, we've had sort of over 1,000 people taking part in sort of the different tour ride events, and they've raised over £130,000. And also the work that we've done with the partners. I mean, today we're being joined by, you know, sponsors, partners, potential partners and sponsors. And you know, over the years, we've worked with a number of them, and Skoda telling their car pink, and various kind of product pieces that have been done with Dare to Be and Fenwick's, and, you know, had some amazing partnerships there. They've raised over £20,000 for Breast Cancer Care now, Breast Cancer Now as well. So the funds that have been raised through it, but also just the participation, you know, the kind of, you know, the raising awareness and getting the message out there and encouraging people to take part in exercise and cycling, and encouraging more people into women's cycling has been, you know, very important for us, because I think, you know, the 3 things that we know, you know, raising awareness helps, you know, helps early detection helps the outcome of people with breast cancer. We also know that exercising after diagnosis of breast cancer helps reduce the risk of a reoccurrence. So any activity and partnership that can help us sort of encourage people to exercise is also really important. And obviously, finally, as I said, the funds that have been raised over the years means that we can continue to provide those services free of charge, but also hopefully reach our goal that by 2050, nobody will die from breast cancer. So when you have a partnership that does those things in synergy, and helps promote female sport for, you know, a very female health charity, I think we're all very proud of what it's doing and has done over the last 4 years.
Absolutely. Claire, thank you. We'll come back to more of this in a moment. But Rose, a date that we keep talking about is 2014, of course, a fantastic inaugural edition of the race. And it really, really was a very special, pivotal moment, wasn't it? But in your mind, how much has the sport of women's cycling changed since 2014?
Oh, it's changed absolutely hugely. I think, you know, in terms of the racing, it has changed. I think all of the teams have, you know, you can even see it kind of tactically in the races. There's kind of a lot more, the riders can specialise a bit more because it's become more professional. You know, a lot of them have the ability to be, well, you know, a huge percentage of them can now be kind of professional or full-time. Back in 2014, I think a huge amount of the riders would have been working jobs on the side unless they were, you know, the very, very top. So in that sense, it has just made the level of women's cycling has raised astronomically. The race is still, because I think that women's racing, you know, not to insult men's racing, but I do think women's racing has always been a little bit more exciting. It's a lot more animated than the men's side of racing. The stages are a little bit shorter, and in some ways that kind of works in the favour, you know, for spectators and for fans, because it's just so engaging right from the start. And I think that's been really special. But I mean, away from the actual racing itself, just the attention that women's cycling gets now is more than it absolutely ever has. It's been an astronomical kind of rise. Now we see women's special editions of magazines outselling their men's editions, you know, by 3 times. There are women's editions of races, like things like the Tour of Flanders. Their viewing figures can, you know, eclipse the men's viewing figures. So I think it used to be seen as kind of a lot of people's kind of side project to put on women's races, to have women's teams. But now they kind of stand fully on their own. And I was reading an article just last week about how women's sport has so much more engagement. You know, when partners and sponsors come on board, the level of engagement that they receive back is much larger than you do getting from, you know, the men's version of that. So yeah, I mean, the racing this year is particularly exciting, I think, because you have all of these kind of almost imperious figures like Annemiek van Vleuten and Anna van der Breggen racing, and they're just really at the top of their game. And it's amazing to see them come up against each other all the way through the seasons, in one-day classics, in stage races, that, you know, on the men's side, you kind of have to wait for those, you know, that one marquee event in the year to see the very best go against each other. But it's kind of also a changing of the guard. So they've got all these young riders coming up at the same time, and you know, seeing all of their potential and seeing this new generation of talent come through. It's really, really, I mean, I think this year we've just seen some of the most exciting racing that we've ever seen in women's racing.
We haven't, and as you say, it is just such a treat to have this volume and to be able to watch it, you know, more and more each year. And of course, the Bunny Hop, which we've been working on together, and you're now the host of the podcast Feminine, you know, you're so passionate, of course, about bringing more coverage to people. It's so important to you. Yeah,
absolutely, totally. And I think when you have an event like the Women's Tour, you know, you want people to go to see it because it's just full of those engaging moments. I mean, just hearing Claire talking about that moment with Kasia winning that stage, you know, it makes you emotional thinking about it, because
I can't talk about it without crying. Like,
it's like, oh God. I wasn't going to recover from listening to you, Claire, but but you know, this race has created all of these kind of really iconic moments, you know, in your mind. Like, I remember this time when Marianne Vos and Corinne Rivera, I think it was 2018, it was a real fight to the line. I think it was like stage 2, I'm sure someone will correct me on that, in 2018. And, you know, Marianne Vos, who is just the greatest of all time, you know, misses out really narrowly to Corinne Rivera, and she's just you know, is kind of inconsolable. You know, she's just totally devastated, sitting on a curb, tears in her eyes. And it's just one of those things where you see how much having the opportunity to race in front of loads of people, to get to be having loads of attention, and have these kind of really important races in cycling is to the riders themselves, as well as to the journalists and to you know, to the fans.
We've touched upon this already a little bit, Rose, but I'd love you to expand on it if possible. You know, why the British races, in particular the Women's Tour, of course, have been so pivotal in pushing the growth of the sport globally and really leading the way with that.
I think it's a little bit like what I touched on earlier about kind of just always showing these athletes to be the professional, you know, treating them with respect and showing them to be these professional athletes who are incredibly strong, who are incredibly inspiring. And I think you get some races, you know, and they have kind of shonky footage, and, you know, people who don't know, you know, people are interviewing them that don't know anything about it. You know, the route map is wrong. So, you know, you're standing waiting to take a photo and the road is actually, you know, 100 meters behind you. And it doesn't obviously give women's cycling the kind of the credit that it deserves. So I think it's, you know, the fact that the women's tour kind of set out its stall early on to be incredibly respectful, to do everything professionally, to have an attention to detail, make sure everything is can run smoothly, is a big factor in it. I just think also on British roads, they're actually, that you might not have a big alpine pass, but they're really, really hard to race on. So you get this really exciting racing, and I think that moment, with coming back to Kasia Niewiadoma again, but I think when she won that women's tour, that was such a landmark moment in her career. That really kind of launched her career. She was always kind of a young pretender, but at that point she also became a champion. And you'll know, Rebecca, on the bunny hop, our last show, it was a moment when we're talking about Kasia Niewiadoma and her career. It was the moment that Joe Rousel picked out as, one moment in Kasia's career that sticks out in my mind that made her career was that stage at the women's tour and going on to win the GC. So I think, it's a huge amount. It's the professionalism. It's the toughness of the roads. It's the fact that I think when you see a race where there's lots of people excited on the side of the road, it makes a huge difference. I think we noticed that, during the pandemic, it's become even more obvious that when you see a bike race and there's no crowds, it makes such a difference. So I think, the women's tour always puts out, and the other British race as well, puts out a huge amount of, brings in the crowds, gets people excited, gets people watching. And then when you're watching it at home, it's, that reflects on you as well, that's exciting for you.
It does. And Hugh, I know we've talked a lot here just about how much, I guess, the riders love coming to this race. And for me, as an interviewer for you behind the scenes, you talk to the riders and you just get that overwhelming feeling straight away that everything that Rose has mentioned, the professionalism, the attention to detail that you put in behind the scenes to make this race what it is and treat the riders with the respect they deserve. Can you tell us a bit about, just how much goes into that and why it's so important to you?
That's a big question. We're already planning for 2022 now. So we know that in 2022, and we'll be back to June date in 2022, by the way, almost certainly, that we'll be working to start the race. I think it's already out there, but anyway, I'll take a chance on it not being. But we're starting in Colchester in 2022 and finishing in Oxfordshire. The Oxfordshire Council have been extraordinarily supportive, and they've been with us now they would have been obviously the last couple of years, but let's not forget that this year's race, it'll be 840 odd days before since we had the last one. But then in another, not that long ahead, we'll be having another race. So we've got two races coming up in pretty quick succession. But there's an enormous amount of work going on. The team at SweetSpot is divided into sort of two elements. You've got the team that are organising the races and dealing with the councils and the counties and the police and the health and safety and all the sorts of hoops and hurdles you've got to get over to put a race on. But luckily for us, and I think perhaps partly some of the success of the women's tour was due to the relationships we had and had built with the men's tour over a period of sort of 10 years or so. And the people who allow us to race on these roads that Rose is referring to trust us to organise it in a manner that is safe, obviously for the riders primarily, for the team that are organising the events sort of on the side of the road. But of course, paramount is the safety of the spectators and so forth. We can't have numerous cars and motorbikes and cameramen and cyclists riding past hundreds of school children unless there's somebody there that's making absolutely 100% sure that this is an extremely safe event to put on. Luckily for us, over the years we've created these relationships and they do trust us to do it. But it's an enormous amount of teamwork, and the fact that we're actually putting a race on a tour, by the way, in 2021 is testimony to the team's efforts, because it's quite an achievement in the current climate to be able to do that. And one of the things, obviously, that we wanted to reach out to today and Rose eloquently mentioned this, is that we need sponsors to take the races on to the next level as well. So in order for us to sustain things like the prize money and having an even more improved TV offering to the people who are still going to be watching it from home, we need to have sponsors who want to join us on the journey. And I think listening to Claire talk about the efforts that she and the team at Breast Cancer Now have made in the past and will continue to make should resonate with a lot of businesses out there who not only want to be probably illustrating their sort of sustainability credentials, their credentials in terms of their Britishness and their connectivity, but also, this is a really good news story, and also, if from a philanthropic and from a causal perspective, we can do something really, really meaningful and build on the relationship with the one that we've created thus far with Breast Cancer Now, I think it makes for a very compelling story. And the fact that we're putting a race on so soon after, hopefully, and they're continuing to change every day, but after the restrictions are lifted, there's no doubt that we'll still have some restrictions during the race in October. And of course that costs a lot of money, more money than we've had to spend in the past, when we haven't had the sponsors coming in to help us, take up the slack financially speaking. So it's a big situation, but we're willing to take it on. We've got great partnerships with our stakeholders around the country who support us enormously, both financially, but also most importantly of all, perhaps, in terms of getting out to the schools and the spectators, because we don't spend that much money on actually doing any conventional advertising and promotion, because we'd rather work doing it sort of organically from the bottom up, rather than buying airtime and space in magazines and newspapers and so forth, because at the end of the day we don't charge anybody to watch. So the fact that this is the biggest free event in the world, well, cycling is in general, and because the women's tour is now the biggest free women's pro cycling race in the world, this is the biggest show that we're bringing to people, literally and metaphorically speaking, going past their back garden or in their backyard. And so I think I often have to remind myself to mention the fact that this is the biggest free race, and so doing, any sponsor that gets involved is also getting the reflective glory and creating the goodwill of providing the Mariana Bosses and the Lizzie Dynans for the spectators to come out and watch.
Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we are here to celebrate a fantastic 7 years, but we also do need to be looking forward, don't we? Everything you've just mentioned very much needs the support. So, anyone watching today that is potentially thinking there might be a sponsorship opportunity, there are plenty of opportunities, basically.
For sure.
And Claire, I know that obviously, as we've touched on already, so many things postponed and put off due to COVID restrictions, but you've, I've heard, managed to very successfully continue fundraising virtually. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes. Well, if it'd been March last year, I don't know whether I would have been able to answer that question and really known what the year was going to hold. I mean, I think, we've all been hit in so many ways, and at the charity, as with the women's tour, all our live event activity, over 40 events we had to cancel or postpone. So been a really, really tough.
Well, we lost Claire for a minute. Is anyone else getting Claire, or is it just me?
No, we're not getting her either. Okay,
Claire, if you can hear us, we might continue and hope to get you back in just a moment. Just giving her a minute.
But I think what Claire was about to say, if we're allowed to speak on her behalf, is that every single charity in the country has not been able to put on a single event for the best part of a year and a quarter. So and without events, in the same way that without events we don't throw off any income either, without those events, these charities have obviously had to slash presumably all their overheads and their fixed costs, because they haven't had any income to speak of from all those fundraisers that are running a marathon or riding a sportive or doing a challenge of some description, which having being one of the authors of Ride London, I knew how important that was to countless charities who were obviously using Ride London as a platform, both for awareness, but also to help them raise money. It's a traditional model that, and I'm not sure if how much this goes on in Europe. Perhaps somebody else who's an expert in this could tell me. But as a nation, God knows how much is created by just ordinary English women and men, or British for that matter, going out and doing a ride or a run or a walk or a row or a swim or whatever. It must run into hundreds of millions of pounds, and none of that has been able to happen. So the dent that has made on the charity industry, if I can put it like that, must be, well, it's an existential problem, I should imagine, for a lot of them.
Yeah, massively.
To get Claire back or not?
I think she's likely to pop back in a moment, so we'll continue without her just for the time being, and then pick up with her, because I know that there's some impressive figures, actually, as you say, Hugh, that they've managed to achieve in very difficult times. And just before we do like a final look forward and then get some questions in from the audience, I'm just keen, I know we've mentioned a few, but just to get everyone's real standout special moment from the last 7 years. So Rose, can you pick one women's tour moment that is your go-to in your memory?
I would have to say that is very tough. I would have to say probably the Burton Dassett stage in 2019. It was, I think people remember it was fantastic because of the racing. Again, Kasia Niewiadoma was involved in that as well, actually, and Liana Lippert and Lizzie Banks, and it just went all the way to the line. In this undulating course, really hilly, really tough, just, they're kind of doing laps, kind of smaller laps around it. And it was just every time the race came past, it was just, attacks going off, being brought back, and just fireworks the whole time. I thought that was really special. And it was also special just because it was, the weather wasn't the best. It was a bit wet and windy, but the crowds were still out. And I thought, if you can have racing like that is really exciting to watch. Just edge of your seat stuff, and you're not having to rely on, like the Giro Rose often relies on these beautiful vistas and beautiful sunshine on a fountain in the piazza. If you can just have a really not so good weather day and still pull off some just really, really exciting racing, I think that's quite an achievement. So that kind of sticks in my mind.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, we were saying earlier, weren't we, that the weather that day wasn't as good as it could have been, and we were definitely huddling in a press tent.
Yeah. But I mean, we did stay, of course, Rebecca, we were pulled out of the press tent by every time the race came past, because it was it was great. And it was kind of, I think it was also a breakthrough moment for Liana Lippert, who's now really contending at the top. So I think seeing those big career making moments firsthand, that's really special.
It is special, and there have been many career making moments on the women's tour. Hugh, what would stand out for you? Can you pick one moment? Is that possible?
One moment, one good one and one bad one. Am I allowed to do that?
Yeah.
One bad one, probably, because it's still etched in my memory banks, would be Lizzie, I think she was still Armistead then, crashing into Mick Bennett at the finish line, which was an incident that obviously none of us would like to see repeated again. But that was not a great moment, but in a funny sort of, perhaps British sort of way, we can find a little bit of humour in that, in a weird sort of ironic sort of fashion. Good way, I think, this picture to my left here of Kasia. We've talked about her a lot today, but that has to go down as a highlight. Not necessarily from a racing perspective, although obviously she just won that stage. But the backstory that was going on definitely, and I've got to be honest, I hadn't really appreciated, I don't suppose, the significance of the ribbon at that point in time. I mean, I had it explained to me, but I hadn't totally made the connection. I've got to be honest. But when I did find out about it, that goes back, I mean, takes you back to a very happy day when she won, and then the aftermath of that, meeting up with Laura was amazing.
Claire, have we got you back?
Yes, I'm so sorry. My computer just completely died on me. I do apologise.
It's absolutely fine. It's making me feel better because I've had a few frozen glitches my own. So, so thank you for that. I just wanted, we're just doing our best ever women's tour moments over the last 7 years. So I'll ask you that in just a sec, but I'm really keen to hear, I know there's a really impressive fundraising figure that you were about to get to before we
Sorry, I'm not sure where I cut off. I think I just said, obviously all our live events had cancelled, and we were at the charity in a position where we'd been looking at virtual options, and we actually managed to pivot our team quite quickly onto developing virtual events. And we've done that really successfully this year. We've actually engaged with about 30,000 new people, and we're on track to raise about £5 million from our virtual events, which is a mixture of walks and runs and swims and cycles. In March, we did a virtual cycle event. We asked people to cycle 300 kilometres over the course of the month. We had over 3,000 people taking part. It raised £524,000, so over £500,000 people actually just getting on their bikes and cycling. And I think, we've seen that a lot this year. And I think it's one of the really interesting things that we're all, as live event experts, going to be thinking about as we go forward is, I know it's really important to Hugh and the team as well, and to all the partners, that we reach as many people as possible, that we promote women's cycling, we promote the professional element of women's cycling, but that those role models, those wonderful women that are out there doing this, that Rose talked so passionately about, and then inspiring more people to take that up, get on their bikes and get involved in cycling. And for us at Breast Cancer Now, this year's shown us ways in which to reach more people with less barriers, which has been really interesting. I think, especially people that are, often haven't got on their bikes since they left school, they'll come out, they'll watch the women's tour, they'll be inspired by what they see, but they might not feel ready themselves to go along and take part in a sportive or a live event, because they're worried that they're going to be last, or that they're not going to fit in, or how are they going to get their bike there? And so, this year, the kind of creating that virtual opportunity for people to just go out and do their own thing, however they wanted to, and just get on their bike and go out around the local streets and just get back into cycling and start enjoying it again. And that will just build, and people will get more involved and start coming along to those bigger live events in time. But I think, we've got a great story to tell, and, myself and the team have got lots to talk about in terms of how we drive that women's tour to spread out across the UK and get more and more people on their bikes during those days when the women are really pushing themselves to the limits on hills and in bad weather, and getting more people on a local level joining in as well. So lots of learnings. We've all got lots of learnings from this year, I think, how things can be done differently to get more people involved in sport, and specifically cycling.
Oh, for sure. Couldn't agree more. And just briefly, could you just pick your one key moment from the last 7 years of the women's tour?
Well, we know what it's going to be. Actually, I'm going to say the day 2017, when the women's tour was on the streets of London, and London shut down, absolutely shut down. And it wasn't for fast cars or for a big male activity. It was women, and it was women at the top of their sport shutting down central London. And to be part of that hasn't happened before. We haven't seen that. That was just absolutely amazing. It felt a pivotal moment for cycling. It felt a pivotal moment for women's and their sort of place in sport, and how we can be inspired by that. And watching Cassia win, and then sort of that whole connection that she'd had with Laura, and being able to share her trophy with Laura. But for us then to have over 1,000 women that day as the warm-up act, because before the actual women's tour, there was that final stage, we actually we had our own cycle event, and it was celebrating 25 years of the pink ribbon, and it was it was the kind of the warm up to the final stage, and an amazing opportunity for your average normal woman who, like I said, hasn't got on a bike since school, through to the people that go out there week after week after week onto the hills cycling, to come together. They took part in a 25 kilometre ride through the streets of London, raising huge amounts of money and raising massive awareness for the charity. And for them, the next stage of the professionals coming through those streets immediately after them. So yeah, that was an amazing highlight for us as a charity, and a kickstart to the partnership that we couldn't have really topped, to be honest.
Rose, what are you most looking forward to about the Women's Tour returning in October, and what can we expect from this race?
Oh my, well, you've landed me in it there, Becca. Now I've got to keep my cycling journalist credentials and get a few things right, I guess. I'm really excited to have, unfortunately in women's cycling, there have been quite a few stage races that have been cancelled, either due to pandemic or previous to that, a few kind of stage races that dropped off of the calendar, quite kind of big events like Tour of California, Tour de Yorkshire, things like that. So to have more stage racing, to be able to have a stage race in October is it's just a great thing, because I think stage racing brings such a different dynamic. There's all these jerseys for sprint jerseys and best British rider and overall general classification, and so in every single day there's so many little battles going on to get more points for the Queen of the Mountains, or to get more points in the sprints jersey. So it's a whole new dynamic that I think we've lost a little bit by some of the stage races disappearing. I think the fact that it's in October is really great timing, actually, because there's a few other marquee women's cycling events that's going on around that time. Obviously there's the World Championships, which is always kind of around then. There's also Paris-Roubaix, which is the inaugural Paris-Roubaix, whether hopefully that will actually happen at some point. But that's meant to be in October. So what I expect is that the riders are also going to be, October is going to be the part of the season they are going to want to build up to. They're going to want to be in good form for the classics that we've just had. They're going to want to be in good form for the Olympics, and they're going to want to be in good form for that kind of October block. So I'm not going to put any money on who's winning what, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be a very, very strong battle.
Perfect answer. I held it at you, and as always, you handled it, Rose. I'm going to you can probably see I'm just starting to scroll through questions here. I've got a good one here. You've touched on the future of the race a little, but do the panel have any specific ideas on what would be the next step for the Women's Tour, both in terms of what SweetSpot would like to provide and what fans and journalists would like to see? Hugh, do you want to pick this one up first?
Yeah, I think, just to echo what Rose is saying, I mean, hopefully in this October we'll have somebody that may have won a gold medal or wearing the rainbow jersey after the Olympics and the World Championships, which would be huge. But that's not something that's in our control. But in terms of what we can do, I certainly see a situation where we could have flag-to-flag live coverage of the races in future. I'd like to see. So the one thing that we haven't got parity on is the total duration of the race. So maybe moving up to an 8-day race, if the UCI allow us to do that. I think that would be absolutely the maximum that we would like to go to. Would mean starting on a Sunday and finishing on a Sunday, which wouldn't be a bad thing. Because if you've got the 2 weekends going, it means you can do stuff with festivals on the weekends with the hosts in the particular venues concerned. I really would like to go back into London, and Claire just reminded me, actually, and I know this sounds a bit daft to say this, but I've forgotten what an amazing day that was in London, and the fact that it was so significant for you as a woman seeing women cyclists. That bit might have actually bypassed me, bizarrely, but it's absolutely valid, and I think that's a very, very strong point. So having the women's race finish in London again, which would enable us to do precisely what happened on that day, which was to have a sort of a rally and just a really strong sort of making a big strong statement about women's sport taking place on an exclusive sort of basis. That was a bit that I'd never perhaps really stopped to think about. Was a very big moment, and so I would strongly recommend anyone listening out there to lobby their local MP or whoever runs the council in London, try and get us back into the London streets to do precisely that. So the three things would be to go to 8 days, to have Flag to Flag live, and to be back in London. And if we manage to tick all those boxes, then I think we would be able to look back and say that the women's tour would be in incredibly rude health. And by the way, attracting a titled sponsor, of course, is going to be improved, with all due respect to our partners in other parts of the UK. But having a finish in London clearly does move the dial quite a lot.
I'm aware we've got about 10 minutes. I'm going to fire a few more questions out there. We've had a question from Gray. What do you think about the inspiration/legacy effect of the women's tour with regards to driving participation of female cyclists at getting into amateur competitive cycling? So I guess touching upon that competitive route through as well. I don't know who wants to pick this one up first, maybe Rose?
I knew that was coming to me. Hope I didn't look too panicked. No, I think, we heard it from Lizzie Banks herself at the beginning. I think that's a huge testimony for her to say that, you know, she was on the side of the road in Matlock, and what she saw made her want to be a part of it. And that really did give her the pathway through. I think not necessarily getting so much into the kind of competitive route, but I think it's huge for, well, I mean, I guess, the thing is with Lizzie Banks is she is an athlete that didn't go through that kind of British cycling pathway. You know, you get those kind of sporty kids at school and they get picked up and they get streamed into these kind of pathways in which they can realize their potential and become professional athletes. And, I know that isn't the case with Lizzie Banks. You know, she only became turned to cycling when she was in her last year of her medical degree, into her 20s. So I think that just goes to show you, the kind of inspiration that you can have, that, if you're someone that wasn't like the sporty kid at school, to be inspired by what you see and want to be a part of it. And I think on a more grassroots level, I think like Claire was saying, it's just inspiring to see women and strong women and women who, what I love about, not the only thing I love about women's cycling, obviously, but the fact that you get some riders who their nails are completely done, they've got mascara on, and they're going to go out and ride really hard for like 150k and, just be themselves on the bike. And then you get other riders who obviously, don't want to wear any makeup and just want to be filthy on the bike and whatever. And I just love that it's you don't have to fit one mold to be a cyclist. Even if you're a professional cyclist, you don't have to fit one mold. And I think that's kind of inspiring. I might have dodged
the role models, Rose, isn't it? It's so important to have role models that you look up to. We all know from like a very young age, you've got little boys and girls who are looking at all of these professional footballers that are on the TV day in, day out, and it inspires them to go out to their local, park and play football. And that needs to happen. You need people to look up to, and the women's tour is helping to drive that. It's creating those actual genuine, like you say, Rose, real variety, like, not one mold, but people that women and girls can look at and go, oh, look, that's really exciting. Oh, there's a place for me. I can get on a bike. I can do more than just cycle to and from school or, to the shops and back. I can actually do something with this that's going to take me further and be a career, and like whether it's amateur or professional, but bringing to life kind of, you know, the opportunities that are out there and how to get there and making them real and bring them to the streets all over the country. Here, London, obviously, but all over, you know, one of the lovely things about the women's tour is it goes into places that a lot of other sports are perhaps not as prominent, you know, and you get those communities coming out going, my goodness, I can't believe, you know, Southwold like doesn't have a massive sporting, you know, team locally that people go and support, but you get all those schools coming out going, crumbs, this is like a big deal and it's on my front door and I want to go and watch it. And, you know, you inspire generations. It's really important.
Yeah, well, you just perfectly, both of you put exactly what I would say, so thank you for that answer. One for you, Hugh. I'd like to congratulate both the men's tour and the women's tour for the fantastic Ride for Heroes that they're putting on. As a blue light emergency services worker and keen cyclist, I think this is a brilliant way for the organisers to say thank you to all of the emergency workers. And another follow-up for that, could you tell us about the Ride for Heroes for anyone that hasn't seen that in action, Hugh?
Yeah, well, obviously, we couldn't help but be touched by, I mean, it seems like actually surprisingly a long time ago now, but when there was the sort of local support for essential workers and key workers, people banging their saucepans and anything they could get their hands on, that, you'll forgive the awful pun, but that sort of chimed with us a little bit. And so we felt that we needed to do something. We were in a position to do something which would sort of echo that a bit during the women's tour and the Tour of Britain for that matter. So what we're going to do is we've asked all our partners at council level and on a sort of regional basis to put forward people who have made a contribution, but that could be not just an obvious example of somebody who's been doing some vaccine or somebody working in a intensive care unit, but it could be a local postman who's gone out of their way to sort of do a little bit more to knit the community together. So to put forward people who have made a contribution, and they will be riding out both ahead of all stages of the women's tour and the men's tour this year, hopefully with a Lizzie or a Mariana or a Mark Cavendish or somebody like that, so that the crowds can acknowledge their contribution. There'll be a great photo op for the local regional newspapers to come out and to promote the fact that these people have made such an incredible contribution. Many of whom perhaps have do it in silence without making a big fuss. I think that's a very British thing. People just get on with it, and some of them might just enjoy, and hopefully they will, the fact that people are making a bit of a fuss of them. And at the finish, we'll be doing the same thing as well. So. I think it's we are, you know, we're duty bound to be able to use that situation to illustrate and to amplify the contribution that all these amazing people have made. I mean, you know, I can speak for a little bit from experience here because I had my second jab. You know, I'm of an age where I've had my second jab now, and I could not believe how amazing the people that were working in the vac centre were. Totally unruffled. The whole thing worked really slickly. They were all smiling. I guess like the majority of people, I went in sort of trying to be as cooperative, of course, as I could possibly be, but I didn't need to because everything was very, very slick and everybody knew exactly what they were doing. And one of my close friends, she's been working as a volunteer there, and she said that 99% of people are absolutely extraordinarily both cooperative and grateful for the treatment that we've received. And as a nation, I think we've dealt with that in a really thorough and an enviable way, judging by the reaction of a lot of other people in other countries. So it's a good opportunity for us to show that A, Britain is back on its feet again and we're putting on sporting events, that B, that the country is open for business, and if at the same time we can show our appreciation to all these wonderful people, obviously the vast majority of whom have volunteered, of course they have. I think that would be a really good thing to be able to do. So that's, perhaps I've gone a little bit too long, but that's what Ride for Heroes is all about.
Not at all. A very lovely note to end on there. Hugh, thank you, and to you, Rose and Claire, as well. Now, of course, the race will take place on October the 4th to the 9th this year, and we'd absolutely love your support on the roadside. If you've got any more questions, I know we didn't get to them all, and please don't be a stranger. We're, of course, on LinkedIn under SweetSpot Group and the Women's Tour, and indeed SweetSpot across social media. So do ask away and get in touch, or via the website. And yeah, well, we'll see you again very soon. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Bye-bye.